Regional Transportation Authority's public hearing on the proposed 2025 regional budget and five-year capital program. Our presentation will begin in a few minutes, followed by public comment. All participants should remain muted until called upon to provide comments. If you'd like to make a comment, please put your name in the meeting chat and we'll call you in the order that your names are listed. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can let us know in the chat, or if you can't access the chat, you can email communications with an S at rtachicago.org. I'm going to turn it over to RTA Chairman Kirk Dillard to open this meeting.
Thank you, Tina, and thanks to everyone who is joining us. I'm the RTA Chairman, Kirk Dillard, and I want to welcome everyone this afternoon and thank you for joining us. A couple of guidelines for the hearing today. As we mentioned, all participants will remain on mute until it's your turn to speak. If for any reason you have or experience difficulties, first try using the chat box. And if you cannot enter the chat box, please email again communications with an S at rtachicago.org. That's communications at rtachicago.org. Everything in this meeting will be recorded, and this is a formal public comment meeting of the RTA. Before the presentation begins, I want to thank a couple of my fellow RTA board members who are here with us, and I'll ask you if you would to unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and talk about the area in the RTA region that you represent. I'll start with, I see Director Bill Colson. William Colson's on the or is in the meeting. Bill, you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself and say what you represent or what area you represent?
Sure. Bill Colson. I represent suburban Cook County, and I was appointed by the board members representing the northern Cook suburbs.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. Great member of the RTA board. John Rotondo, a relatively new member of the RTA board, and we're so lucky to have him. He's very experienced, especially in apprenticeship. And I will say before I turn it over to John to introduce himself and talk about what area he represents. Mass Transit's a great career. I was at the City Club today with Mayor Johnson, and it is a wonderful career for anyone of any age, but especially young people and students to think about. Mass transit is a great career, whether you work for the CTA, Metra, Pace, or any mass transit agency. It's a wonderful career for young people or anybody of any age. Director Rotondo, how are you?
Very good. Thank you, Chairman Dillard. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Rotondo. I've been appointed to represent DuPage County.
Thank you. And again, John's an expert on apprenticeship and labor issues and just a tremendous new addition to our board. I will now thank all of you for being here tonight, including my board members. If other board members join us, Tina, please let me know, and we'll have them introduce themselves and say hello. I'm going to now turn this hearing over to our RTA Executive Director, Leanne Redden, who will introduce a few staff who will walk us through the budget. And Leanne will come back on and give us a preview of what to expect from regional transit in 2025. Leanne, it's all yours.
Unmute. I should be good at this by now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and those of you who are joining and or in the future listening in to us as well. Appreciate you tuning in to hear about some of our challenges and our issues and the budget. So welcome. And as the chairman noted, I'm the executive director of the RTA, the planning and financial oversight agency for the region's transit system. The 6-county RTA region makes up only 10% of the area of the state, but it's responsible for about 74% of our economic activity. So this level of activity and output, economic output, is only made possible by having a large transit system that meets the changing needs of our riders. And throughout this year, our regional transit system, operated by CTA, Metra, and PACE, has worked to improve service, expand access, bring back riders. And I'm pleased to report that while there is still a lot of work ahead of us, 2024 has really been a year of momentum and growth. And I think that's, if we jump to the next slide, we can sort of touch on some of that. CTA, Metra, and PACE are providing more than 1.2 million trips each weekday. Special events and off-peak trips are outpacing pre-pandemic ridership numbers. And each agency has seen double-digit ridership growth year over year. And that's thanks in large part to the COVID relief funding dollars that we have that have really allowed the agencies to expand service. And in places where service has been added, riders have returned. This momentum is at risk, however, and if in the first half of 2025, the state does not find a funding solution to our looming fiscal cliff, we believe that transit, though, is the answer to many of our region's greatest challenges. But to be the solution that we know it can be, we must reform our funding structure to be less reliant on fares and end the decades-long cycle of chronic underfunding so that the RTA and the three service boards, CTA, Metra, and PACE, can deliver the service and the system that riders and residents deserve. I'm happy to introduce our Chief Financial Officer, Kevin Bueso, to talk a little bit more about the operating budget, and then later he'll turn it over to Malik Vaishnav, who'll talk about our capital program. And then I'll come back to give you a bit of a look at the year ahead, and then we'll open it up for public comment. So Kevin.
Thank you, Leanne, and good afternoon. I am Kevin Bueso, Chief Financial Officer of the RTA. I am going to cover at a very high level the operating budget for regional transit in 2025. Next slide, please. The 2025 regional budget is projected to have expenses of about $4.1 billion. This represents a 5.7% increase from the 2024 budget. Each operator intends to add service in 2025. CTA and Metra are budgeting for service above pre-pandemic levels, while PACE innovates with new bus rapid transit service and partnerships to solve riders' first and last mile issues. The agency budgets assume ridership at a collective 78% of pre-pandemic levels. No fare increases are planned at this time for CTA, Metra, or PACE for 2025. Next slide, please. This slide shows the various components of the $4.2 billion of revenue that support the proposed 2025 regional budget. RTA sales tax continues to provide the largest share of support, but you can see the federal relief funding, which here is shown in dark brown. It's making up about 20% of our budget. That's 20% of our regional budget. Closing the gap is critical, but as we have noted, it is very important to keep in mind that closing the gap alone will not pay for the system that riders want or deserve. Next slide, please. On the expense side, the shares by agency are little changed from prior years, with CTA representing a little more than half of the regional budget. Metra a little more than a quarter, PACE Suburban Service is 8%, and PACE Regional ADA Paratransit Service is 7%. The proposed budget for the RTA agency, again, makes up a small portion of the overall regional budget, 1.4%. Now I'll turn it over to Malik Vaishnav to talk a bit about capital programming. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Kevin. Good evening. I'm Malik Vaishnav, Senior Deputy Executive Director of Planning and Capital Programming at the RTA. I will be presenting a quick overview of the 5-year capital plan. Next slide, please. The 2025 to 2029 capital program contains $9 billion in funding for CTA, Metra, and PACE projects, which is a significant increase from previous years. 57% of funding will come from federal sources, which includes both formula and discretionary funding. 17% from CTA bonds and 14% from state funds that includes PAYGO from the motor fuel tax. 10% from the City of Chicago TIF district and 2% from service boards and RTA sources. Next slide, please. The funding split by service board is shown on this slide. $7 billion for CTA, or 73.5% of the capital program, including almost $4 billion for the Red Line extension. $2.1 billion for Metra, or 22.5% of the program, which includes $400 million for new rail cars. And $379 million for PACE, or 4% of the program, that includes $138 million for electric buses. Next slide, please. The RTA evaluates all capital projects included in this proposed program based on 12 regionally important themes that are included in Transit is the Answer, the strategic plan, and listed here on this slide. These themes range from improving access to key destinations, improving accessibility and equity, to impact of the project on safety and security. Each theme is evaluated using 1 or 2 matrix totaling 15 evaluation measures. All of the project evaluations are available for review in our budget book appendix. Next slide, please. And here's a view from the appendix of what these measures look like. This document contains evaluation of all proposed projects in the proposed program. On our website, RTAMS, the RTA Mapping and Statistics site, people can also look at approved projects from the 2024 to 2028 capital program and their evaluation measures. Projects in the 2025 to 29 program will appear on RTAMS once approved by the board later this month. Next slide, please. Very quickly, we wanted to touch on some key projects included in the capital program in 3 of the 12 important areas that the regional transit system is focused on addressing. These focus areas include providing a more equitable transportation system, working to achieve a fully accessible system, and reducing transit's climate impact. The service boards have put a significant emphasis into the capital program on investing in a more equitable transit system. For CTA, the equity projects include RLE, 103rd Street Garage electrification, funded at $133 million. For Metra, equity projects include the 78th Street entrance at the new Auburn Park Station, funded with $33 million, and the Harvey Transportation Center, funded with $8 million. For PACE, equity projects include River Division electrification at $82 million and Southwest Division electrification of the garage at $92 million. Next slide, please. Another emphasis is significant funding in the program to continue to make our system fully accessible. CTA's accessibility program includes the ASAP program funding, focuses on making stations fully vertically accessible, and includes improvements for Oak Park and Ridgeland on the Green Line, Cicero and Austin stations on the Blue Line, and Clybourne Station on the Red Line. $78 million funding is included in this program. Metra's accessibility enhancements include improvements to Rogers Park and Olympia Field stations with a combined investment of $62 million. While PACE's fleet is already accessible, new vehicles will add and enhance accessibility with stronger lifts and other amenities. PACE's investment in the new paratransit vehicles is $44 million. Next slide, please. Finally, the region continues to make major strides in funding cleaner transportation in this program with major investments in several projects. CTA has programmed $305 million for the purchase of articulated e-buses and associated charging equipment, as well as $133 million to electrify the 103rd garage. Metra is funding new technologies, including zero emissions train sets, that's $206 million, and battery powered locomotives at $38 million. PACE is proceeding with electrification of their services. There's a planned investment of 92 million at the Southwest Division Garage and 82 at the River Division Garage. In addition, PACE will be ordering new hydrogen-powered paratransit vehicles to test another solution with a $4 million investment. That concludes our presentation of the operating and capital plans. Now I'll turn it over to Leanne Redden, our Executive Director, for additional information on the 2024 and 5 priorities.
Thanks, Maulik. The RTA has the work that we've been doing this past year really has been guided in large part by our strategic plan named Transit is the Answer, which was approved by our board in February 2023. And we saw significant implementation progress this year with a few projects that I just want to highlight here. So in particular, I'll call out our work on making riding transit more seamless and affordable. Back in January, we launched the Access Pilot Program, a partnership with Metra and Cook County to provide reduced fares to people experiencing low incomes and specifically targeted to riders across the region who are SNAP or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program recipients. So far, more than 5,000 people have signed up, and the pilot continues through July of next year. And we are hopeful that additional funding will also allow it to expand to incorporate CTA and PACE riders as well. This summer, we published a fare equity report also that looks at various fare programs offered by the transit agencies and how to improve and better fund them. And importantly, all of the transit agencies are collaborating on the debut of a regional day pass in the coming months. This will be a one-day pass that allows riders to travel on any bus or train across the entire region, making a major stride forward in terms of fare integration. So next slide, please. In early 2026, we anticipate nearly all of the federal COVID relief funding will have been expended. So two paths really emerge for us going forward. Absent sustainable funding for transit operations, the system falls off the fiscal cliff. Dramatic service cuts lead to immediate drops in ridership, setting the system back. Or we can invest in our region, securing sustainable funding, and ridership grows with more service on the street. We connect more people to jobs and opportunities, and we can even take more cars off the road. So we think the message is clear. There is a choice to be made here, and I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes of my time sort of contrasting some of the impacts of the fiscal cliff compared to fully funding the transit system and expanding the system that we have, that our system really does rely on. So let's move to the next slide. The structural 20% deficit translates to a 40% cut in service, which would be absolutely devastating to the region. On the other hand, increasing our operating funding by at least 1.5 billion a year from current levels allows the transit agencies to expand and improve service. So for example, expanding PACE Pulse, implanting regional rail and express service to O'Hare via Metra, and overhauling CTA's bus service to work better for riders. If we are forced to cut service, a bus rider in the city will see current 15-minute headways become 25-minute waits. In the suburbs, 45 minutes turns to over an hour for a bus. A Metro line that previously ran 90 trains a day will be cut down to 54. However, the flip side of that is, with the funding of 1.5 billion annually, the picture is much better for riders. We achieve 10-minute headways on urban bus, 30 minutes, maybe a little less in the suburbs, and a Metro line that's currently running 90 trains can expand to running over 120, working to achieve frequent all-day service that Metra is envisioning. A $1.5 billion investment in transit would echo throughout our region, growing our GDP by 2.7 billion annually, adding approximately 28,000 jobs, and taking almost 300 million miles of vehicle travel off the roads. So next slide, please. I think it's important just quickly to think about the fiscal cliff, and that is really just the beginning of really what is a negative feedback cycle. Less service leads to lower ridership, which results in lower revenues, more cuts in service as budget gaps grow and they become harder and harder to solve. Next slide. So to ensure this doesn't happen, our team has been busy meeting with lawmakers and stakeholders to prepare for what we expect to be a critical legislative session in 2025. And these are just some of the key dates that we need to focus on as we look to looking towards a solution at the end of the fiscal year in 2025. So next slide, please. The greatest risk that we really face right now is inaction. And if Illinois does not act by spring 2025, CTA Metro and PACE will be forced to shift their focus from improvements and expansion to prepare for drastic and dramatic service cuts, fare increases that will really be needed to balance their budgets, halting all the momentum that has led to some of the ridership gains that we've recently been experiencing. Federal civil rights law requires that any major cuts and fare increases that must be equitable to people of color and people experiencing low incomes. The service boards would be required to begin planning for these cuts, do complex equity analyses, and hold public hearings on the cuts before they can even be enacted. It's also important to keep in mind that once a tax is imposed or increased, it takes several months for tax revenue to get to the three service boards and fund the bus and train operations. So it's vital that we push for a sustainable solution in May or June of 2025, really to ensure that the momentum that we have can continue. So next slide. We have said that from the beginning that we expect that any new that we expect any new funding to come with reform. And so I just want to share the RTA's 2025 legislative agenda in some detail with you. And we continue to advocate for the legislature to not only fill the gap, the financial gap, but increase operations funding by at least $1.5 billion to really support service expansions across the region. So next slide, please. We added a new set of priorities for 2025, focused on advancing a multi-layered approach to safety and security, as discussed in our safety summit that was held earlier this year. The rates of violent crime occurring on buses and trains are continuing to decrease, but there is much more work to really be done to further reduce crime and improve people's perception of safety on public transit. We're calling for the state to partner with local and county officials to increase the presence of law enforcement personnel and the presence of social service personnel across our system. Riders have been clear that they want to see more police and more support staff at rail stations, at bus stops, and on our transit vehicles. Next slide. The RTA is advocating for new operations funding to come with reforms that would establish a stronger RTA. Specifically, we're proposing that a strengthened RTA has more authority over the service boards, over service specifically, fare policy, and capital prioritization. We envision an RTA that would serve a regional rider hub for fares and customer service, ensuring that all riders have access to simple and easy to understand fare programs. The legislature could also direct the RTA to strengthen our regional service standards with policies and mechanisms in place to monitor and enforce compliance. Leaders from each of the service boards would present quarterly to the RTA board with updates on service delivery, schedule coordination, and how they are meeting the region's agreed upon service standards. And the RTA board would have the ability to monitor and enforce compliance on an ongoing basis. In addition, the legislature can empower the RTA with greater responsibility for regional planning and capital project prioritization, building on the work that Molek already talked about. The RTA can monitor the state of good repair of transit assets system-wide as a combined portfolio and track the regional investment needs. This is our proposals as they stand now, and we expect them to continue to evolve as we continue our conversation with the General Assembly and our stakeholders across the region. So next steps, please. Next slide, thanks. Later this month, our board of directors will consider this budget for adoption, and it would go into effect at the beginning of the new calendar year. This budget public hearing is the end of what really has been a many months long process with our 3 service boards and the RTA staff. And we have been out in all 6 counties to make sure that they are hearing about service and our challenges and presenting the budgets and information, basically the information that we are sharing with you tonight. Like we're asking in our conversations around the county, we want to hear from you. That officially concludes our presentation tonight. I will turn it over to Tina, who will be coordinating the public comment portion of this meeting. Thanks, Tina.
Thank you, Leanne. You can move to the next slide. So my name is Tina Fassett-Smith. I'm RTA's Director of Communications. We're now going to begin public comment. If you'd like to make a public comment, please put your name in the chat. And if you can't get to the chat, I will just give a second here to see if anyone actually puts their name in the chat. If you can't use the chat, then you're welcome to just unmute and make your public comment now. And go ahead, Garland.
Happy holidays to you, Tina, and Chairman and Leanne. It's Garland Armstrong, formerly of Des Plaines and Elmwood Park, now living in Des Moines, Iowa. How y'all doing in the Chicagoland area?
Very good. Good to see you, Garland.
Thanks. Hey, I just want y'all to know, especially, I'm deeply concerned too, especially like graffiti, because as you know, that's costing you a lot in your budget too. So I just would like to make sure, how will CTA, Metro, and PACE to make sure that if any individuals who try to sneak on any property like CTA, Metro, or PACE, and to make sure to spray like graffiti on there, will CTA, Metro, PACE be able to have good surveillance to make sure who's that individual trying to spray paint it? Because that shows you that we don't know what individuals will be thinking of, because they're going to try to outsmart y'all, and we'll never get caught, even if they're wearing a face mask over it, so that they want to go ahead and spray something on the rails and the buses. So I just wanted to make sure, will RTA make sure to tell them at every board member to see if any individual will try and do something like that, because God forbid that's a costing in your budget for all 3, because that's what individuals love to do. And everyone, if they're seeing it when they're waiting at the bus or the metro station, they'll say, who is this individual doing the graffiti thing on the Metro, PACE, or CTA? So just wanted to make sure, so it won't cost you an arm and a leg, because that's what crazy people want to do. So I hope they'll be well prepared for it, and RTA make sure how much it's going to cost them, why individuals are doing it, and what to make sure that it will never happen down the road in the near future, because God forbid that's not like that's not showing like humanity for CTA, Metro, PACE, and RTA will say, what happened? So just want y'all to know to be well prepared for it, and make sure for individuals with disabilities and for those who cannot speak clear English, tell them, especially with the fiscal cliff coming, that God forbids, how we can be well prepared for this. And today I was at the DART Commissioners Board meeting and told them the same thing too about it. So Chairman Dillard, one day you should have you should one day come here and have a suggestion for them, because they will definitely need your help on it too. They're facing the same thing too, because they're not going to have paratransit running in one of those communities, and also and no buses too. So you're a good chairman for RTA and a great advocate. One day come here and talk to them at the dark board meeting here. They do it on the first Tuesday. So my suggestion is for you one day come to Des Moines, Iowa, and tell them your side of the story of it, and you could work together, because PACE is going to work with DART, and maybe you should work with them too, helping out, giving them suggestions or ideas, because they really need it from you, because you're a best advocate and one of a kind. So that is my suggestion. And if you have any questions or comments, I'll be glad to answer it from any one of y'all.
Thanks so much, Garland. All right, the meeting is going to stay open until 6 p.m. Please either raise your hand and unmute if you'd like to make a comment of 5 minutes or less, or add your name to the chat. You can also submit a comment on the budget by emailing communications@rtachicago.org. And the website is in the chat and on the screen, the URL. Where public comment is open and through December 10th. And I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, ask everyone else to stay muted, but we will remain in this meeting and live until 6 p.m. Thanks.
Individuals will try to spray paint graffiti on them, and it will cost us so much. So what can we do to make sure that that individual does it overnight if they're wearing ski masks? Because I love the way what Garland does it, helping us.
All right, it is 5:59. So I believe that we can call this meeting to a close. I don't think that there's anything formal that we need to do. But thanks everyone for sticking around. Thank you, chairman and directors, and everyone. And just a reminder, public comment closes on December 10th. We'll post this meeting to the budget page. We'll cut out the silence, but we'll post all public comment to the page. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask Joey or Melissa to close the meeting unless there's anything else.
Thank you all. Thanks, Tina. Thank you, everybody.
All right, have a good night.
Bye,
Bye.
directors.